if you're on a camera, kind of going with digital SLR for this, but it will sort of apply to bridge cameras, mirrorlesses, anything you've got really. Most of the settings should be across the board, unless you're on quite a basic compact camera. But basically, again, I'm just going to go on about how much I hate fully auto. I don't hate it, that's awful. I have mixed feelings about fully auto. It's useful because it helps you get started, but it tends to let you down when you need it, and it tends to make us lazy, because if the camera can do it, why would we learn how to? And then the light gets hard and we don't know how to fix it. So it's always a really good idea to play with the different modes on your camera. I'm going to talk about what I sort of do when I'm doing a shoot, how I pick the mode I'm going to use and things like that. So wee bits and pieces that you can use along those lines. Depending on what you're shooting, it's maybe worth investing in extra kit. This is obviously not what you want to hear when you come to course, is go spend more money. But the cameras, the digital SLRs, when you buy them, they generally tend to come with a kit lens. Depending on the kit you buy, it will either be an 18-55 or something. It'll be like a kind of day-to-day zoom. Canon and Nikon, it tends to be an 18-55. Olympus tends to be a 14-42. Sony and that, they'll all vary a little bit. But it's basically a standard, does the job across the board lens. It's good for day-to-day stuff. It's not so good in low light, and they're not so good for detail. They tend to be a little bit softer. So if you are looking at really getting into photographing your products yourself and getting them done really well, it's worth thinking about what lenses would be useful. A 50mm lens is brilliant for kind of products, food shoots, things like that. They're not expensive, about 90 to 100 quid. The prime lenses, which are a lens that don't zoom, they're just a fixed focal length lens. If you're going to do product shoots, are going to be the way to go. They're going to be the sharpest, but you are going to pay a little bit for that quality. So it's worth kind of thinking about what you're going to do. Is it worth getting a flash or additional light? I mean, my gut feeling is no. I mean, I tend to try and avoid it because it's another thing to learn. But there will be times when you may be limited by natural light. I would use flashes a lot for portraits and things like that. But for certain things, they're not that useful. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about that as well. But yeah, and if anybody has any specific things that they'd like to know about buying more kits, do shout. You can stick that in the questions and we can chat a bit about that. Your camera should have an option on it somewhere, or these little symbols somewhere. These are your modes, your camera modes. Everybody's generally fairly familiar with the green auto. Generally, the other ones don't get used quite so much at the start, but they're really worth playing about with. The joy of the cameras and the smartphones is no matter how much you play about with the settings, if you go back to auto, it will override it and set it back to where it was for you. So don't be scared to change things. There's always a way to kind of get it back. There's always a way to kind of get back to where you started. These modes allow you just a little bit more control. They're really, really useful. You've got M for manual, A or AV. These vary. If you're on a Canon, it's AV and TV. If you're on Nikon, Olympus, Sony, it's A and S, but they're the same thing. So A for aperture priority, S and TV for shutter speed priority, and P for program. And if those don't mean anything, don't worry, because that's why we're here. And you've also got a macro mode. Macro mode is for going close up on things. So if you are a jewelry maker or someone who makes very small pieces, macro is going to be your friend. It's going to give you a low depth of field, so a nice soft background. It's going to give you a nice close-up focus. It's going to work particularly well in compact cameras, mirrorlesses, and smartphones. So this is where they tend to take the lead. Digital SLRs tend to do this better if you have a default macro lens, if you actually buy a macro lens. So they're kind of, the macro mode is good on the smaller cameras, not so great on the bigger ones. If you're doing this, you want to hold your camera in as close as you can. So don't use the zoom. Don't be tempted to use the zoom on the smaller cameras or a smartphone, because it will deteriorate the quality. It'll lose the focus. Digital cameras, the digital SLRs tend to work a little bit differently. But basically the idea is macro mode is you focusing on something close up. Zooming in is telling the camera you're focusing on something far away. So it gets confused and it can tend to lose it a little bit. And at the end of the day, the one thing you really can't fix is out of focus photos. And so it's all about playing about with that.